For the first time in his 17 years, Talo of the Fern-Water circuit was walking his island alone, and the silence of it was so wrong that twice already he had turned to say something to people who were 40 miles behind him. The circuit felt enormous without them. He had walked this same forest road every year of his life inside a moving village, 51 people of the Fern-Water, strung out along the path with the pack dogs and the litter frames and his grandmother's endless commentary on the state of everyone's feet. And the road had always felt small and warm and full, a corridor of his own people moving through the green. Now the same road ran ahead of him gray and empty under the dripping ferns, and the forest that had always been a backdrop was suddenly a presence, vast and breathing and indifferent. And Talo understood for the first time that he had never actually been alone in the world in his life until this exact morning. He was a lean, long-legged boy with his mother's dark eyes and his father's unfortunate ears, his black hair cut circuit short against the damp, dressed in the oiled wool and layered leathers of a people who lived their whole lives outdoors. A walking coat gone gray-green with weather, calf wraps cross-laced to the knee, and over one shoulder the single most important object he had ever been trusted with, which was not a weapon. It was a talking cord. A length of braided circuit work as long as his arm, knotted and beaded and woven in the Fern-Water patterns, and every knot on it was a thing his circuit's elders had spent 3 nights teaching him to carry in his hands and his memory both, because Talo was not merely walking to Varenthas for the great gathering the way every Drevani walked to it. He was walking as the Fern-Water's voice. The circuit's elders were too old this year to make the long crossing. So they had done the thing the Drevani had done for longer than anyone could count. They had put their voice into a cord and a young person's memory and sent it walking and trusted the road to make the young person ready to speak it. The passage walk. Every Drevani made one once in the year they became an adult in the eyes of the circuits, walked alone to the great gathering and arrived a voice instead of a child. Talo had known his was coming his whole life. He had not known until the forest closed around his solitude this morning that becoming a voice meant first becoming this. One small person on a huge old road, carrying his whole people's word in a braided cord and the shaking hands that held it. He made his first camp alone that night in a fern hollow his circuit had used for 1,000 years. And while the small fire caught, he took out the cord and read it with his fingers in the dark, the way he had been taught, so the words would be steady in him when he needed them. Most of the knots were ordinary and ancient, the Fern-Water's greetings to the other circuits, the year's news of births and deaths and marriages to be carried to families spread across a dozen routes, the state of the island's deer, a dispute over an intersection camp that needed the gathering's older heads to settle. Talo's fingers moved through them easily. He had carried this kind of knowledge in some form since he could walk. This was what a talking cord was for. This was 1,000 years of a people who wrote nothing down, keeping their whole civilization alive in braided cord and trained memory, passed hand to hand along the roads. Then his fingers reached the last section of the cord, the newest knots, the ones his grandmother had woven with her face very still, and Talo's hands slowed because this part was not ordinary at all. It was the question, the one the whole circuit had argued about for 3 nights around the fire before they sent him, the one his elders could not agree on and so had done the honest Drevani thing and refused to decide, sending instead their divided thinking to the gathering where the whole people would decide together. The outside world had found Varenthas. The Gray Expedition Society's pale researchers walked the sacred harbor now. The traders from Vaka came with their metal and their glass and their endless wanting. And the great gathering this year would decide, as it had begun to decide the last 2, what the Drevani would do about a world that had noticed them. And the Fern-Water's voice on that question, the voice knotted into Talo's cord, the voice he would have to speak in front of the assembled elders of every circuit, was not an answer. It was a division. His grandmother's knot said, "Hold the boundary, take nothing from them, a people who start trading their knowledge for glass end as a curiosity in someone else's collection." And beside them, his Uncle Seth's knot said the opposite. "The world is here whether we like it or not, and a people who refuse to understand the thing that has found them are a people who will be understood by it instead, on its terms, in its favor." Great, Talo said aloud to the fire, to the enormous dark. They couldn't decide, so now I get to not decide it in front of everyone. Thank you, grandmother, thank you, Seth. The fire popped, the forest said nothing. And Talo understood with a cold weight in his stomach the actual shape of his passage walk. He was not carrying an answer to the gathering. He was carrying a question, and the road between here and Varenthas was where he was supposed to find, somehow, what he thought the answer was, because a voice does not merely recite the chord. A voice speaks. And when the elders of the gathering asked him, as they would, what the young Fern-Water walker himself had come to think, walking his island alone with the question in his hands, he would have to have an answer, and he did not have one, and the road was already half-walked. He met the outside world for the first time in his life on the fourth day, at the bright stone intersection, and it was not at all what the fireside stories had prepared him for. The intersection was where the Fern-Water circuit crossed the Stag's Run, high on the island's shoulder where three valleys met, an ancient campground worn smooth by 1,000 years of converging feet. Talo came up out of the tree line into the open expecting to find Stag's Run people, and found instead, sitting on a fallen log with a strange flat board across her knees, a woman who was unmistakably not Drevani. She was pale in a way Talo had only heard described, coast pale, indoor pale, her skin the color of the underside of a fern where the sun never reached, with sandy hair escaping a practical braid, and a sunburn peeling on a long nose, dressed in the drab layered canvas of the Gray Expedition Society. Her boots wrong for the terrain and her hands stained with the black they used for writing. She looked up at the sight of him with an expression Talo would think about for a long time afterward, because it was the exact expression he was certain was on his own face. Startled, wary, and helplessly, hungrily curious. "Oh," the woman said, and then carefully in badly accented but real Drevani, "The crossing is yours, I'll move. I was told I was given leave to sit at the edges, not the center. I'll move to the edge." She began, hurriedly, to gather her board and her satchels, and Talo watched a pale outsider scramble to obey a boundary his own people had set, and felt something complicated that was not what the stories had promised him he would feel. "You speak the road tongue," he said. "Badly," she stopped gathering. "4 years of trying, your people are patient. The keeper who taught me said my accent sounds like a deer with a head cold." She said it ruefully, and Talo laughed before he could stop himself, and the laugh surprised them both. "Myra Vell sent me, the society. I mapped the island's conditions, the weather, the growing, where the boundary sits and how it moves. I'm not," she gestured awkward at the sacred emptiness of the intersection. "I'm not here for anything of yours. Only the land's allowed. They told me the land's allowed." They shared the edge of the intersection that night, at Talo's offer, which he made before he had decided to, and could not entirely explain to himself after. Her name was Ank, and she was 30 and had spent 4 years living at the ragged edge of a people who would not let her in, mapping their islands from the permitted margins, learning a language that called her a head-cold deer. And Talo, watching her eat her dull outsider food and fumble her Drevani and stare with undisguised wonder at the simple way he laid a fern bed and banked a fire, understood something the cord had not told him and his grandmother's knots could not contain. The outside world was not a wave or a hand or a threat with a single face. It was this. It was one pale, tired, curious woman who had spent 4 years trying to learn the shape of his island and being told, gently and endlessly, no. It was a person. The thing that had found the Drevani was made of persons, and persons could be read and wondered at, and this was the part that frightened him liked. "Can I ask you something?" Ank said at the fire in her deer-with-a-cold road tongue. "Or is asking one of the things I'm not allowed?" "Ask," Talo said. "I'll tell you if it's a not allowed one." "Why won't you write it down?" She nodded at the talking cord, coiled by his pack. "Your knowledge, the circuits, the weather knowing, all of it. It lives in the people, the keeper told me, and when a person dies who carried a piece no one else learned, the piece is gone. Forever. I've watched it happen. An old woman on the Stag's Run died last winter, and a whole reading of a valley's water died with her. And we could have kept it if you'd let us write it, and you won't, and I don't understand why, and it keeps me up at night, honestly, the losing of it." And Talo opened his mouth to give her the answer his grandmother's knots gave. that writing it down would make it a thing that could be taken, copied, owned, put in a collection, that a people whose knowledge lived only in themselves could never be robbed of it, only asked, that the notch writing was the whole armor, and found that he could not say it cleanly any more, because the pale, tired woman across the fire was not asking in order to steal. She was asking because she had watched a valley's water-knowing die and grieved it, which was more than some of his own circuit did. "I don't know," Talo said. "That's the true answer. I'm walking to the gathering to help decide exactly that, and I don't know. Ask me again in Varenthas." The second face of the outside world found him 3 days later, at the coast, and it was not curious at all, and it taught Talo the other half of the thing he needed to know. He had come down out of the island's interior to the shore road for the last leg to Varenthas, and there, drawn up on a shingle beach with a Vaka trade boat riding at anchor beyond, was a trader, a varieties factor, prosperous and impatient, a heavyset man in good coastal wool with rings on his fingers, and a folding table set up on the beach spread with exactly the things the fireside stories warned of. Glass beads that caught the light like water, steel knives that would hold an edge a Drevani flint never could, needles, mirrors, little bright wonders laid out to be wanted. 3 young Drevani from some coastal circuit stood at the table, and Talo watched the trader work them with the ease of a man who had done it many times, and understood the second half of his question in the space of 10 minutes. "The cord work," the trader was saying, holding up a young woman's beaded circuit band, "sacred work, marriage work, the kind of thing that took a season to make and carried a family's whole history in its pattern. Beautiful, genuinely. There's a market in Vaka for authentic pieces, collectors, they pay well for the real thing. This band now, I could give you 3 steel knives and a mirror for it, and you'd have tools that last a lifetime instead of a bit of old string. Think what 3 good knives does for your circuit's whole winter." And the young woman hesitated, and Talo saw her hesitate and saw the exact machinery of it. The knives were real and useful and would genuinely make her circuit's winter easier, and the band was, to her in that moment, just a thing she knew how to make more of. The trade was fair. That was the horror of it, the thing his Uncle Seth's knots had not quite captured. The trade was fair, and it was also the first small turn of a wheel that ended with a people's marriage history hanging on a collector's wall in Vaka, while the people themselves forgot the pattern because knives were more useful than memory, and no single trade along the way was ever the wrong one. It was Amelia's grain by another road, though Talo had never heard that name and never would, a people made dependent one fair, cheap, sensible trade at a time, until the thing that made them themselves had all been swapped for tools. Talo did not intervene. It was not his trade, not his circuit, not his place. The Drevani did not govern each other's choices. But he stopped and he watched, and when the young woman's hand hovered over the steel he said, quietly in the road tongue only, "The pattern in that band, do you know it all, every knot? Could you weave it again from memory tonight with no band to copy?" The young woman looked at him, and then at the band, and Talo watched her realize that she could not, that she knew how to make bands, but not that band, not that exact history, which had been her grandmother's, and that trading it away was not trading a skill she could remake but a specific memory she would lose the moment it left her hands. She kept the band. The trader shrugged, unbothered, a man who closed enough of these to not mind the ones he lost, and turned his bright patient wares toward the next young walker on the road. And Talo went on toward Varenthas carrying both halves of his answer now, and the weight of them, and the beginning, only the beginning of what he thought they might mean together. Varenthas came on him all at once, the way the elders said it would, and Talo stopped on the last rise of the coast road and simply looked, because no cord had ever been able to carry this, and now he understood why. It was not a built city. It was a return to place. 1,000 years of the Drevani arriving at the same point on the same coast, and adding what the place needed, until the whole hillside above the sacred harbor had become a settlement that looked less constructed than grown. Low buildings of island wood and gray stone following the land's own folds, roofs mossed and weathered into the hillside, paths worn by 10,000 generations of returning feet, no grid, no plan, no monument, only the accumulated shape of a people who had loved one place enough to keep coming back to it forever. Smoke rose from 1,000 cook fires. And the sound, Talo's throat closed on the sound. The sound was the whole Drevani people, every circuit converged. A low, enormous chord of voices and dogs and looms and children and the old songs, the sound of his entire civilization in one place at one time, the sound he had been walking 6 days of silence toward. He walked down into it and was swallowed, and for a day he was simply a boy come home to the largest family in the world, fed by strangers who were not strangers, teased about his ears by an aunt 3 circuits removed who had known his mother, folded into the vast, warm human ocean of the gathering. The great gathering was closed to the outside world entirely. Ankh and her board and the ring trader and all their wanting were a coast away, the harbor cleared of their vessels weeks past, and inside that cleared boundary the Drevani were, for this one turning of the year, entirely and only themselves. Talo had not known how much he needed that until he stood in the middle of it. Whatever the world outside was becoming, this still existed. This was still whole. And on the third day, they called the walkers to speak, and Talo of the Fern-Water stood before the assembled elders of every circuit with his talking cord in his hands and his heart going like a pack dog's, and gave his voice. He read the ordinary knots first, and his hands steadied as he read the greetings, the news, the births and deaths and the intersection dispute, and the elders received them. And it was, for those minutes, the oldest and simplest thing in the world, a young voice carrying a circuit's year to the people. Then his fingers reached the last section, the divided knots, the question, and the great gathering went quiet in the particular way it went quiet only for this. Because every circuit had sent its own version of the same divided question, and the walkers' answers were, this year, the thing the whole people had come to weigh. The Fern-Water is divided, Talo said, and read both knots honestly. His grandmothers and his uncles, the boundary and the opening, gave them both their full weight because that was what a voice owed the cord. And then the senior elder of the gathering, a tiny ancient woman, brown and folded as a winter leaf, who had been on the council for 30 years and had been present when the pale researchers first came, asked him the question he had known since the Fern Hollow would come. That is the Fern-Water's division, Walker. We have heard it. Now, what did the road tell you? You walked your island alone with this in your hands. A voice is not a cord only remembers. A voice has walked. So, what do you, Talo of the Fern-Water, carry to us? Talo stood in the silence of his whole people, and found, to his own surprise, that the road had told him something after all, and that he had known it since the beach without knowing he knew it. I met 2 of the outside world on my walk, he said, and his voice was steadier than his hands. I'd only ever met it in stories before. In the stories it has one face and the face wants to take. I went looking for that face. I found 2 instead and they weren't the same, and I think the whole answer is in the difference between them. The first was a mapper. A society woman, 4 years living at the edges of us, learning the road tongue so badly the keepers laugh, allowed to see the land and nothing sacred, and obeying it, scrambling to move to the edge when I came to a crossing, because she'd been told the crossing was ours. And she asked me why we don't write our knowledge down, and she asked it because she'd watched a valley's water-knowing die with an old woman last winter and she'd grieved it. She wanted to keep it. Not own it, keep it. She lies awake over the losing of our knowledge more than some of us do. The second was a trader. Vaka glass and Vaka steel on a folding table, and a young walker with her grandmother's marriage band in her hand, and 3 good knives offered for it, fair and honest, knives that would truly make a circuit's winter easier. And I watched, and I understood that no single trade he ever makes is the wrong one. Everyone is fair. And at the end of 1,000 fair trades, our marriage histories hang on walls in Vaka, and we've forgotten the patterns because steel was more useful than memory. And nobody along the way ever did a single wrong thing. He drew a breath and said the thing the road had given him, the thing that was his and not the cord's. Grandmother's knot says hold the boundary, take nothing, and she's right, the trader proves she's right. Seth's knot says understand the world or be understood by it, and he's right too, the mapper proves he's right. I walked 6 days trying to choose between them, and I think the choosing is the mistake. They're not 2 answers, they're one. We keep the boundary exactly the way grandmother says, the sacred sites closed, the knowledge unwritten, nothing sold, the wall exactly where it is. And from behind that wall, we learn them exactly the way Seth says, we study the studiers, we read the world that's reading us, we understand every face it shows us so we always know which one we're talking to. Not open, not closed, watching. We become the people who cannot be traded into forgetting ourselves because we understand the trade better than the trader does. The mapper can lie awake over our lost knowledge all she likes from behind the wall, where she'll never write a word of it, and where we'll have learned everything worth knowing about her. The senior elder looked at him for a long moment out of her folded ancient face, and Talo could not read it, and was suddenly, agonizingly certain he had said the wrong thing, spoken above his place, embarrassed the Fern-Water in front of the world. Then she said to the gathering, not to him, "The Fern-Water sent us a cord that was divided, and it walked here, and it arrived a voice that is not divided. That is what the walk is for." And to Talo, with something in the ancient eyes that he would carry the rest of his life, "Sit, voice of the Fern-Water, you have spoken, we will weigh it with the rest. It weighed more than you know." Talo sat, his legs not entirely his own, and only later, hours later, folded back into the warm ocean of his people. Did he understand that the elder had called him voice, not walker, and that somewhere in the last 6 days, on a road he'd walked alone with a question in his hands, the child who left the Fern-Water had stopped existing, and this had happened, and no one had told him it was happening, which was exactly how his grandmother had always said it happened. He left Varenthas when the gathering ended, walking the coast road back toward the Fern-Water with a new cord over his shoulder. The gathering's answer nodded into it now, to carry home to the circuit that had sent him, an answer the whole people had woven together out of 100 divided questions, and that was, Talo was quietly proud to notice, not so far from the thing the road had given him. He passed the coast beach where the trader had worked, and it was empty now. The tide come in over the shingle, and he passed, a day later, the bright stone intersection. And Enk the mapper was there again, on her log with her board, and she looked up, and recognized him, and something careful and hopeful crossed her sunburned face. "You went to the gathering," she said. "You came back. I know I can't ask what was decided. I know that's not mine to have." She hesitated. "But you said at the fire, ask me again in Varenthas, about the writing, whether you'd let us keep what you're losing." She looked at him, this tired, pale woman who lay awake over his people's grief. "I'm asking again, not for the society, for the valley water, for the next old woman who dies with a whole reading in her head." And Talo, voice of the Fern-Water, looked at her for a long moment across the ancient crossing, and gave her the answer the road and the gathering had made in him together, which was the boundary and the watching in one breath, and which he understood now was the beginning of a conversation the Drevani would be having with the world for the rest of his long life, and that he was going to be one of the people who had it. "No," he said, "we won't let you write it, not this year, not while I'm a voice, maybe not ever, because the not writing is the wall, and the wall is why we're still here to lose things at all." Enk's face fell, and he went on gently before it could finish falling. "But I'll tell you what I think is coming, mapper, so you can lie awake over the right thing instead of the wrong one. The gathering opened a door this year, a narrow one. A way for the right outsiders to ask, not to take, about the land knowing, the weather and the growing and the boundary you map for the sake of understanding the islands. Only the society's been thought worthy of the asking, only, and nobody's told you it exists yet." He watched that land in her, the hope and the caution both. "So learn the road tongue better than a head-cold deer. Keep obeying the edges, keep grieving our losses like they're yours. And when the keepers finally tell you the door is there, be the outsider we decided we could stand to let ask. That's the most I can give you. It's more than the trader will ever get." Enk stared at him and understood that she had just been handed something. Not the knowledge she wanted, but the shape of a future in which she might, someday, be trusted to sit slightly closer to the fire. And she nodded slowly and did not push, which was, Talo thought, exactly why she might someday be let in. He walked on into the green, alone and not alone, a small person on a huge old road, carrying his people's word home the way his people had carried their word for longer than the world could remember. The forest that had frightened him 6 days ago frightened him no longer. He read its ferns and its water and its light the way the cord had taught him, the way 10,000 years of the Fern-Water had taught him, and he understood at last that this, the reading, the carrying, the walking of the same beloved road forever was not a small life or an old one. It was the whole armor of a people. He was 17 years old and he was a voice, and the circuit went on ahead of him into the trees, exactly as it always had, exactly as he would keep it, for as long as his legs could walk it.